Was the mere act of somebody challenging they were immediately then purging them, or you had to actually prove that they weren't?
No, you don't have to prove nothing. The voter is guilty until proven innocent. There's one GOP official, works for Marjorie Taylor Greene. Are you ready for this? She personally challenged 32,000 voters. She didn't even look at the list. I showed her pictures of her neighbors, her black neighbors whom she challenged. They don't get their vote.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, it's Jordan. Very delighted to be joined by the incomparable Greg Palast, veteran investigative journalist, I should say. Has reported for The Guardian, among others, best-selling author, including The Best Democracy Money Could Buy. Your new film is about the latest attacks on voting rights and voter suppression, and it's called Vigilante Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitman, which was narrated by Rosario Dawson and produced by Martin Sheen. And Leonardo DiCaprio, has released the film for free.
Yes.
So obviously, Americans right now are very dizzy mentally from the rush of activity from President Trump. Hard to move backwards when what he's doing is so prevalent. But you have done a lot of digging on the 2024 election.
Yes.
We're nothing, of a stop the steal persuasion, but digging on the voter suppression that went on, which you've done for decades, really,
yes,
as far back as Bush 2000. And you have found, according to documents, records, and just old school digging, how many votes Kamala Harris might have lost due to voter suppression?
Due to voter suppression, racially biased voter suppression. This is my specialty, and the bottom line number is Kamala Harris would have had 3,565,000 more votes if not for ugly Jim Crow voter suppression tactics. In fact, if you want the numbers, go to gregpalast.com, where Leonardo has made the film available for free, but you can also get all the numbers I'm going to throw at you, and I'm sorry to throw numbers at you, but understand, for those watching, you see from my hat that I'm an investigative reporter, again, for BBC Television, The Guardian. One of my principal beats was vote suppression. And but before I was a journalist, I spent 2.5 decades as a forensic economist for the United States Justice Department, attorneys general, and governments around the world. And my job, and then also working at the NAACP, my job was to come up with the numbers when people cheat, whether it's elections or corporations or whatever. I'm the numbers guy. I used to be a professor of statistics, as a matter of fact. And so here's the numbers. This is, by the way, if you're expecting Greg Palast to tell you that Kamala Harris lost 3.565 million votes, which would, by the way, given her popular victory over Trump by 1.2 million. Also, she would have won Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, and she'd be president now with 286 electoral votes. These calculations have nothing to do with Elon Musk changing the voting machines from outer space. If you've got that tinfoil hat stuff going, you won't be happy here. I'm talking about good old-fashioned Jim Crow. And all my numbers, every one of them, come from government files, which it's like hidden in plain sight. We have an agency called the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission. That's my main source. They keep track of our votes. They also keep track of the non-votes, votes not counted, people excluded. Let me give you some of the numbers. The year before the 2024 election, 4,776,706 voters were purged, crossed off the voter rolls. We're the only democracy of nations considered democracies that actually strikes people off voter rolls. So almost 5 million people were blocked from voting without any probable cause at all. I'll go through my studies for the ACLU on that.
And just to be clear, were the majority you found black or minority?
We aren't guessing. We are not guessing, because when I went into Wisconsin, I went into Georgia, we have the in Georgia, they list the race of the voter. It says BLA next to black. We called for statisticians know, we called 800 people removed, and overwhelmingly black. A number of young people who are also voters of color, the color being blue. In fact, let me go a little bit into that. So I did this report for the ACLU, where I hired Microsoft and Amazon and the U.S. Postal Service experts, and we worked on it together and went name by name. And through the addresses, people who are accused of moving from, black people accused of moving and not living at their voting addresses, we found, and we gave to the state and a federal court where I testified, the names and addresses of 198,000 voters in Georgia alone.
Wow.
That were wrongly removed. They are living exactly at their voting addresses. Their only crime was voting while black. And by the way, if you watch the film Vigilantes Inc., again, go to gregpalast.com, stream it. It's not just numbers. 198,000, that swamps Trump's so-called victory in just one state. Again, we went name by name, but it's not just numbers. I was at the polling station, Jordan, when I saw in Atlanta, when I saw one black person after another thrown out of the polls saying, you can't vote here anymore, including a 92-year-old woman in a walker who was thrown out. She'd been voting at the same voting stations for 50 years. Christine Jordan's her name. I went to the house she supposedly didn't live in anymore down the street from the polling station. And there on the wall was a picture of her, younger woman, 50 years earlier, with her cousin having dinner at her house, Martin Luther King. This is Martin Luther King Jr.'s 92-year-old cousin. They removed her for no reason, and 198,000 other people in Georgia. That's just the beginning. 317,000 people were challenged by Vigilante Vote Challenge. Now, this is brand new, or I should say it hasn't been used since the Ku Klux Klan used this method in 1946, which is that individuals who are not government agents, but there's old Jim Crow laws still left on the books in a couple dozen states that says that I, Greg Palast, any individual can challenge someone else's vote. I can say Jordan Chariton does not live wherever you live, Washington, or whatever. He doesn't live there. He should not be allowed to vote. Now, who am I? Again, this was originally used in 1946 by the Ku Klux Klan to challenge almost every black voter in Georgia and elect a Klansman, Eugene Talmadge, as their governor. This was resurrected by the Trump front groups, including one called True the Vote out of Texas. And they proudly announced 317,000 challenges. The NAACP tells me that in Georgia alone, there were 200,000 challenges by election day, people blocked from voting, including, by the way, and again, you'll meet him in the film, Major Gamaliel Turner, African-American Pentagon expert on what's called warfare of the future. He was assigned from Fort Benning, Georgia area to California, Fort Hueneme, California. He didn't get his ballot, so he calls up the state and says, "Where's my ballot? I'm here in California." They said, "Well, Mr. Turner, you've been challenged." He says, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "No problem. Just come in. Someone has challenged you. All you have to do is come in, prove you're a citizen, prove your address in Georgia, and we'll give you a ballot." And he says, "You're telling me 2 days before an election to fly to Georgia, 2,700 miles away, to prove that I am an American citizen?" This is an officer of the United States Army, right? That to prove that I'm an American citizen, again, by again, he meant back to the Jim Crow days, and prove he is who he is. So he's just one.
So was the mere act of somebody challenging they were immediately then purging them, or you had to actually prove that they weren't?
No, you don't have to prove nothing. The voter is guilty until proven innocent. So Major Turner, now one GOP official, his name's Alton Russell. He's the chairman of the party in Republican Party in Southern Georgia. He personally challenged 4,000 people, most of them black soldiers in the Fort Benning area. 4,000 people, one guy. He got this list from this Trump front group. He didn't even know who these people are. He didn't go through his list. And in fact, in the film, he comes to Major Turner's house. And I said, you know where you are? He said, no. He said, well, you said, this is here, meet your host, Major Turner, African-American war hero. And by the way, you challenged his right to vote because you said he didn't live here in his house. Challenged 4,000. Now, there's one GOP official, works for Marjorie Taylor Greene. Are you ready for this? She personally challenged 32,000 voters. She didn't even look at the list. I showed her pictures of her neighbors, her black neighbors whom she challenged. They don't get their vote unless they find out they've been challenged. Not so easy. And if you find out, you have to go into your county office and prove you are who you are. But again, it's not random. Overwhelmingly African Americans. They seem to particularly aim at African American soldiers and students who they know are temporarily are trying to get an absentee ballot.
I was going to ask about the student component, because that's been expanding over the years. The long lines at college campuses, the photo ID for students. Did you see an increase in suppression on college campuses or towards young people of color?
Yes. Well, young people are of color. Their color's blue for the most part. There's been some shifts. But for example, part of that, and for example, in Wisconsin, you can't use a student ID to vote. You have to have a picture ID, but you can't use a student ID. But you can use your gun permit to vote. So what's happened is you come in with the wrong ID and they hand you, and this happens to students, black people who are on these challenge lists, etc. They will say, oh, you're not on the voter rolls, and people will walk away. Or you have the choice to say, oh, fill out this provisional ballot, which I call a placebo ballot. It makes you think you voted, but you haven't. You fill out this ballot, paper ballot, and you write your name and information on the outside of the ballot. And the nice lady behind the desk says, don't worry, they'll check your registration and they'll count your vote. No, they won't, Jordan. According to, again, the United States Elections Assistance Commission, 43% of those provisional ballots, almost half, are thrown in the garbage. You have to go into your voting office. People don't know this. And what happens, so are you ready for this number? In this last election, 1,200,000 provisional ballots were thrown in the dumpster. Now, whose ballots? And again, you asked the right question. What's the color of the ballot? Well, again, according to the government, if you are black or Hispanic or Asian American, the chance you will be shunted to a provisional ballot is 300% higher than if you are white. So consider the numbers there of the 1.2 million ballots in this last dumpster. In addition, it's about whose vote ultimately gets rejected. Now, now this is from the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. It's not Greg Palast. It's, I'm using the government figures, which are sitting there for my fellow journalists to look at. If you're black, the chance your ballot will be disqualified, mail-in ballot, provisional ballot, any type of ballot, the chance your ballot will be disqualified is 900% higher if you're black than if you're white. That's the official U.S. government position. If you are in mail-in ballots, there's the other one. People mail-in ballot. Most Democrats vote by mail. You're 51% more likely to vote by mail if you're a Democrat. Black people in America, especially in the South, Atlanta, South Carolina, Wisconsin, places like that where you have big black populations, up to 70% of African Americans vote early, usually by mail, drop box, or in person early. Again, the massive disqualification effect is huge. So, for example, you had, again, 2.1 million mail-in ballots rejected. Mm-hmm. According to NPR, which is always fun, the reason I'm laughing about NPR, they calculated that 14%, that is 1 in 7 mail-in ballots, is rejected. 1 in 7. And overwhelmingly, again, according to the state of Washington, 400% more likely to have your ballot rejected if you're black than if you're white, your mail-in ballot. And that's in Washington state.
Right.
So what I'm saying is you have this these numbers are hard numbers from government figures. The rejection rates, the bias in throwing out ballots and purging people is enormous. And
well, Trump won by a little over 2 million popular vote. You're talking over 4 million.
Yeah, about
people.
Well, in net, because I have a lot, I'll statisticians will note that there's some double counting in here, which I pulled the error out so that there's no double counting. Not everyone purged is going to vote, would have voted for Harris or voted. But looking at the net numbers, it's 3.5 million votes. Kamala would have won by 1.2 million in the popular vote. And again, 4 states would have gone her way.
And the devil's advocate, just to ask, because obviously Trump had a huge improvement among Hispanics.
Yes.
Not as much among black voters, but a little bump among black voters. Yes. If a lot of those voters purged were Hispanic, how do you ascertain that, you know, most of these votes would have went to Harris?
If you add up all the ways that you can lose your vote, it comes out to about 9 million ballots. If you read my article at tomhartman.com or gregpalast.com, all these various things add up to many millions. What I have to do is take out the double counting in the air and the Republicans and the people that switched to Trump. So that's a net number of 3.5 million votes would have been added to the Harris total. And again, this is not, you know, some guy from outer space messing with the computers. This is good old fashioned Jim Crow stuff. It's just that the purges were heavier. The provisional balloting was heavier. Again, that's overwhelmingly thrown at voters of color. But I think one of the biggest things here was the massive number of these vigilante vote challenges. And that was brand new this year. I mean, they took it out for a test drive 4 years ago in Georgia, where they always test these Jim Crow tactics. And then it rolled out nationwide to a couple dozen states this year. In fact, the True the Vote, the main organization behind this vigilante vote challenge business, they said that their aim was to ultimately, by election day, challenge 2 million people. And they were helped by other organizations, including Trump's lawyer, Cleta Mitchell, who has an organization, Eagle AI, which was also mass challenging voters in Philadelphia, which had a lot to do with the loss of Pennsylvania, in Florida. Remember, there's other races besides the presidency in Arizona, in Nevada.
Are a lot of these challenges you found happening in those urban centers that are critical to Democrats, like Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Detroit, which Democrats need to overperform in these areas, particularly among black voters, to win statewide?
Yeah, well, let me split it in 2 parts. We found that the challenges were very heavy in places like Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Philadelphia, especially. In the challenges, the purges were massively destructive to voters of color in Philadelphia, especially. The number of voters purged off the voter rolls was several times Trump's so-called victory margin in Pennsylvania. It could not have happened except for these purges. In fact, I did a study for ACLU and Black Voters Matter Fund of the purge list in Wisconsin. Again, we got the experts from the post office and Amazon to go through every single name on their purge list. And we found, to answer your question, we found the experts, we literally mapped every illegal wrong challenge. And they were almost entirely in black precincts in Milwaukee, except for a few student housing precincts in Madison, Wisconsin. Now we were able to.
It's interesting. It's interesting because I was on the ground in Philadelphia on election day, and people I was talking, not just social media, but folks I was talking to, the early day notion was historic turnout, particularly in black neighborhoods. But then the actual total, it was an undercount. So it's very possible that there was high turnout, but a lot of people were turned away.
Yeah, you know, that's one of the things I find amazing about the U.S. press. It says, oh, well, the turnout dropped, and it did from 2020. But at least 2 million of those votes were accounted for by purges and challenges, people being blocked from voting. It's not that people don't want to vote, didn't show up to vote. They weren't allowed to vote. And you have to understand, the numbers are sitting there for you to look at. That's why we have a federal agency. This is what they do. And I'm still getting updates on numbers because a lot of the states are stonewalling the NAACP had to sue the state of Georgia to get me some of these figures in federal court. I had to win a federal court case to get this stuff. But most of it is sitting there for anyone to look at the documents and the massive number of votes we don't count in America. So people show up and they're purged, and they are given a provisional ballot and it's not counted, or they mailed in their ballot and it was rejected because, for example, in a lot of states like Georgia, if you registered and you used your middle initial in your registration, but you don't put the middle initial on the back of the envelope that you mail in, right in the garbage, disqualified. So we're talking, again, 14% of mail-in ballots are in the garbage. It's overwhelmingly voters of color. Like I said, the Washington State says it's a 400% higher rejection rate for Black people in mail-in balloting. And so you mail in your ballot and they're looking to knock you out. And it's not small, 2.1 million ballots, just mail-in ballots rejected. So you have to understand people are trying to vote. Now, yes, on net, there was a decline in both the Democratic vote and the overall vote. But a lot of this is explained, not all of it, but a chunk of it is explained by the purges, the rejections, the provisional ballots rejected. And one of the reasons this has happened, Jordan, is if you go to the Brennan Center for Justice, which is at New York University Law School, they have said that 30 states passed laws since the 2020 election, between the 2020 election and 2024 vote. 30 states passed laws making it much harder for people to vote, and as they point out, particularly voters of color. Mm-hmm. And that explains, so Jim Crow explains the outcome of the election. Now, there's always been Jim Crow a factor, but this year, or 2024, it hit a new horrible high. And
can I ask you, because when I've done interviews with you in the past on voter suppression, and in the old days, it was the governor or the secretary of state of the state, their henchmen purging people. Obviously, you have counties run elections, so Republican county officials purging people. But here, it's kind of hard to find. It seems like there's a lot of different entities involved with the purge. You have governors, secretary of states, county officials, these,
self-appointed vigilantes,
nonprofit groups, vigilantes. So this is coming from many different directions, correct?
That's correct. And also, you've got a kind of a melding there because, for example, again, except for the test run in Georgia 4 years ago, you're talking about, a massive attack on the voter rolls by non-governmental officials saying, you can't vote and stopping you from voting. Now, one of the things is, you're supposed to get a postcard, but the return rate on postcards, because it looks like junk mail, no one sees them, especially students, you move down the street, whatever. The return rate in Georgia was 1.2%. Well, 99 out of 100 postcards aren't returned to say, save my vote. But the other problem is challenges were happening the day before, the day of, and even the day after an election. You don't get your card for 30 days. So even if you find it, it's too late, brother. Trump was heading to the inauguration. So this has, again, gotten much worse, and it's coming from different directions. In addition, you've got these nonprofit, as you say, nonprofit groups, basically a lot of these new right-wing so-called public interest law firms, but they're coming from the right. Like in Wisconsin, the big purge was pushed by the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. That is funded by the right-wing Bradley Foundation out of Milwaukee. They're big funders of not only of Cleta Mitchell, who works with them, that's Trump's attorney, who's, by the way, on that infamous phone call where they demand that the Secretary of State of Georgia flip 12,000 votes for Trump. So you have these outside groups pressuring government and bringing lawsuits in courts, which now about a third of the appellate benches are Trump appointees. And it's really hard. I went into federal court, by the way, with the NAACP Rainbow Push and Black Voters Matter. We went to federal court, and it's just impossible because they now defer to the states. It's, you now have a states' rights bench, unless it's California, then they're anti-states' rights.
I have two questions that are kind of linked. Number one, why are, as far as I know, why are mainstream journalists not looking at any of these things if they're all, sure, it's tedious, but like you said, out in the open. You're the only one looking at this. And number two, I mean, the Republican Party and Trump's enablers, I mean, they raised holy hell, filed, 60 lawsuits against, not for nonsense with nothing.
Yeah.
Did the Democratic Party and its army of lawyers not know any of this or look into any of this? I mean, Harris conceded right away, and you haven't heard peep from the Democratic Party about this.
Well, actually, two things. Let's talk about the media. Where is it? Now understand, I am mainstream media. I'm BBC and The Guardian. I also write for Rolling Stone. But so in the rest of the world, I'm as mainstream as you can get, top of the nightly news. In America, this work is not carried over to America. I'm what's called a data journalist. I got the Global Editor Award for data journalism on this work. And so, first of all, most journalists in America are kind of number phobic, so they stay away from these things unless someone hands it to them. Like the New York Times did cover our lawsuit against on the 198,000 voters, but all they had to do was report what I had already come up with, so that was easy. Now, I told you that NPR, they did a wonderful job of finding out that 1 in 7 mail-in ballots are thrown in the garbage, but one thing you will notice, no matter how many stories you get about vote suppression, they don't ever come back after an election and say, well, remember that story about the mail-in ballots being thrown out? That's 2 million mail-in ballots. That's how that affected this election. I've never yet seen an American newspaper after an election say, remember those voting rights stories we did? It overturned the election. They've never, ever said that. They've never bothered to calculate it. So why don't they go back? In fact, I will say the New York Times, while they didn't do the numbers on these vigilante challenges, did run a story on it. Why don't they go back later and say, well, here's how many people were challenged. Here's how many votes were lost to Kamala Harris. That turned over the election in 4 states. So you get the coverage of some vote suppression trickery in the mainstream press. What you don't get is the follow-up after the election and the calculations about what it meant, because there's almost this feeling, and that gets us back to the Democratic Party. Joe Biden gave a statement to NATO right after the election saying, American elections are perfect and wonderful, and we are the gold standard of democracy. And you could hear all the Europeans coughing in the audience. Are you kidding me? No, they don't allow people to challenge your vote in England. I've covered elections England, Liberia, Venezuela, Argentina, England, of course. They don't have this in other nations. They're obviously dictatorial regimes which have phony elections. But when you're talking about democracies, this is unique to Americans. And so our press isn't covering it, but the Democratic Party takes the position that you can't say anything about the wonder of America's voting system. The problem is Joe Biden said we needed to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Well, Joe, if American elections are perfect, why do we need the John Lewis Voting Rights Act? It's very difficult to get these people after an election because they stick you in with the Trump so-called, oh, you're an election denier. I'm not an election denier. I'm a numbers guy telling you what the numbers were. And I will say, I mean, look, it wasn't that no one talked to the Democratic Party. I can tell you that Jesse Jackson met with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris a few weeks before the election and said, listen, here's Greg Palast's film. They know me. Here's Greg Palast's film. You got to watch his latest thing and then take action on it. And they did, first for the Democratic Party, hire a voting rights attorney, Mark Elias, who's really good. But, it's like Mark Elias and his tiny team versus armies of vote challengers from the state to individual nutcases, militia intimidation, you name it. I mean, they just didn't take it on. So I don't expect the Democratic Party to take it on. The groups that went to federal court, again, Black Voters Matter, ACLU, NAACP, Rainbow Push, these are the organizations on the front line which are taking on the issue. I don't ever expect a political party to save my vote.
Right. And beyond the, obvious most important part that people are being disenfranchised, this creates false narratives and then, miscalculations in terms of parties. because the narrative is, well, Kamala Harris underperformed among black voters, or, Trump overperformed in this area, this and that. And, oh, people are, the country's moving right. When the reality is, she very well could have won.
All these things are correct. The country is moving right. More voters of color went for Trump. A lot of people, the total turnout was lower. These are true. We can measure that. But let's also measure the votes that were not counted. Let's measure the number of people who were stopped and blocked from voting. I'm not guessing. We have numbers that go with these things.
Right.
Ballots rejected all over the place. Challenges. You got cockamamie things like on mail-in ballots. We had something like 300,000 ballots rejected for postage due, and a similar amount rejected because some GOP officials, generally GOP officials, said they didn't like your signature, didn't match your registration signatures. Now, these forgery experts, by the way, if someone's forged a ballot, they should go to prison, not have their ballot thrown away. I was talking with a guy, Adrian Conasseri, a student in Savannah, and some official said, "Oh, your signature doesn't match your registration signature." He says, "I just registered. I mean, my ballot came right after my registration." They said, "Well, just come in and re-sign your ballot." He says, "Well, I'm at school in the middle of my finals." They know that. They're going after those students. They know what color they are. They know their vote. And this is very typical of what's happening. And the Democratic Party, on one hand, says we have to have voting rights, voter rights protection laws. In fact, Kamala Harris's comment to Jesse Jackson about my findings was, "Well, we'll pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act." Well, lady, you ain't going to get elected unless you do something about it before the election. This is the problem.
How does just logistically, the vigilante challenges, do you have to show up in person to challenge it? Can you fill it out online?
Yep, this is the craziest. Are you ready for this, Jordan? This woman, her name's Pam Reardon, and you'll see her. I actually confront her on camera with her, and I said, "You challenged 32,000 people. And how did you do that?" She said, "Well, I just got a spreadsheet from True the Vote, this Texas Trump group." She said, "I got the list from True the Vote," and she just hit the send button, sent in the spreadsheet with a cover letter saying, "I don't believe these 32,000 people are proper voters living at their proper voting address." That's all she wrote. That was it.
That's actually what I wanted to know, because that's what I wanted to know, because doesn't that open up actual foreign election? I mean, can't anyone in Russia or anywhere else just with an American IP address submit whatever they want?
You have to. Their one rule, and which is why it could have even been worse. The one rule is that you have to be a registered voter in the county where you make the challenge. So that's why this one woman only challenged 32,000 voters. And the chairman in southern Georgia, he was in Muskogee County, Georgia, or Columbus, which is Columbus, and that's why he challenged 4,000. Thank God you're limited to just your county. But he literally took the list, which he didn't even look at, and just sent in the spreadsheet to his county with a short cover letter, and that was it. All those people were instantly blocked from voting. They couldn't get a ballot. And here's the ugly thing. You mail in your ballot. In a way, Major Turner was lucky that he found that his ballot didn't come to him so he could find out what the hell happened. But if you got your ballot and you mailed it in, it wouldn't count and you wouldn't know it. It would just be set aside. Oh, that's a challenge ballot. You wouldn't know it. So but literally you just send in a spreadsheet, and they're downloading these spreadsheets from these hit groups like True the Vote, Cleta Mitchell's Eagle AI. There's even one group called Pigpen Project. In a couple states, they were stopped. Like in Nevada, the Pigpen Project was stopped by the courts. But, in Philadelphia, no. In Georgia, certainly not. And again, Wisconsin, while it was technically a government purge, the purge list was given to them and forced on the state by a right-wing organization that again, and Cleta Mitchell there is actually the lawyer for that group, Cleta Mitchell being Trump's lawyer.
So obviously, I mean, you've always been straight. You're not a Democrat or a Republican.
No.
You're just given the facts. But for people that actually care about this, where do you even begin to fight back? Because at the end of the day, even if there was a mass campaign to get rid of these vigilante laws or this and that, ultimately it seems like it would end up in Trump's Supreme Court. So how do voting rights activists or just any American who cares about voting and not having, you know, black, brown people disenfranchised, how do people fight back against this?
Well, as a matter of fact, I was just talking with Reverend Jackson, and it's real simple. We restart the voting rights movement. You know, when Martin Luther King crossed the bridge at Selma, not a lot of black people had the right to vote in the South. And yet a Congress elected by white people, there was enough of a political movement, enough of a public education movement, enough of people being sympathetic to those losing their votes that they were able to get the Voting Rights Act passed and the Civil Rights Act passed. We have to get back there again. Yes, we've gone backwards. Voting Rights Act has been gutted by the U.S. Supreme Court. You don't have a favorable court. You certainly don't have a favorable, you don't have a single branch of government which likes you. But that doesn't stop you from the long-term work of recreating the voting rights movement. There's really no shortcut. The other thing I do tell people, by the way, one thing that was very effective in 2020 was that the voting rights groups ran a massive campaign to notify people who were purged, to notify people who are challenged. To 150,000 phone calls were made by the Hispanic frontline group Southwest Voter Registration Education Project. 150,000 phone calls to Latinos who were purged. Black Voters Matter sent out postcards. Transformative Justice Coalition helped people when they got those provisional ballots. What shocked the Republicans in 2020, and again, I'm not partisan, I'm just telling you the players and who they are. But in 2020, as the Secretary of State of Georgia said, the Republican Party was stone cold shocked that almost 20,000 people came into what is called curing their provisional ballot. When the ballot was not accepted, they could go into the county office, re-sign their ballots, and prove and show new ID. Now, you might say that's a crazy thing to have to do, but people did it, and that's how Biden won in 2020 with that massive campaign to get people registered and get their ballots counted. This time, I have to say, the same groups, I worked with them, like Black Voters Matter funded. It was so overwhelming, and NAACP is so overwhelming, happening in so many states, that it was impossible to get the information and contact voters. And, you know, plus the right-wing states are getting more savvy on how to hide this information. You know, again, I had to go to federal court to get these purge lists. You know, that's a lot of a heavy lift. But the only thing we could do is we need a voting rights movement again. It's a battle. I think the problem is that, and a lot of civil rights leaders, voting rights leaders told me this. Everyone thinks it's over. You know, 1965, Martin Luther King crosses the bridge. You get his birthday off. Obama was elected. What's the issue? The answer is they've been chipping away and chipping away and chipping away at the voter rolls, at getting your vote counted. And, you know, so we have to restart that movement, and it's not going to be easy. It may take a decade. Sorry to tell you that.
Could you, first off, thank you, because this is tedious work. You've probably spent hundreds of hours just going through.
I like numbers. I like numbers.
Can you tell people again how they could find out about watch your movie at your website, and, you know, if they want to try to look through these purge lists, you know, yes, any information you could give?
Yes. Well, start out by going to gregpalast.com, GREGPALAST. Go to gregpalast.com. You see the investigation work I did for Tom Hartman. Also, if you're heavy into it, my technical reports for the ACLU are there because I do that technical court work. And I have other information I'll be putting out, and I've written these other books. But also, hey, I'm just asking you to watch a movie, grab some popcorn, and the film narrated by Rosario Dawson. which is Vigilantes Inc., America's new vote suppression hitmen. By the way, the reason it's called Vigilantes Inc., Jordan, is that in 1946, when this challenge method was last used, it was the Ku Klux Klan plan to elect their guy as governor. They succeeded. To cover their tracks, the Klan reincorporated itself as Vigilantes Inc. So that's how we got the name, because that's what's coming back. Now, go to gregpalast.com and watch, and you can stream the movie there for free. It's on, we even put it out on YouTube. But go to gregpalast.com so you can get the backup information, stay in contact, sign up and subscribe as I'm putting out more of this information. We're not done. This is the beginning of the discussion, not the end. Democrats especially tend to take a nap after an election. The vote challengers, they don't sleep. They are running full tilt boogie. So this is the wrong time for us to hit the snooze button on voting rights.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and explanation. And I certainly will be watching. Thank you.